You ever meet someone and instantly feel safe? Like they're not trying to impress you, fix you, or outshine you. They're just with you? That kind of presence is rare. And the older I get, the more I realize it's not about charisma. It's not about being extroverted. It's about understanding people. That's what this book is about. Not manipulation, not fake charm. Just the real stuff no one taught us in school. How to connect, how to make people feel seen, and why that changes everything. How to Win Friends and Influence People sounds like a business manual, but when you actually sit with it, it feels more like a human manual. In chapter 1, it hit harder than I expected. The first time I read this chapter, I was ready for tactics, like say this phrase or smile exactly 13% more. But that's not what I got. Instead, Carnegie opens with a truth so simple it feels like it shouldn't matter. But it does. Criticism is dangerous, not wrong. Not ineffective, dangerous. And that word choice stopped me, because I'd never really thought of it like that. I thought criticism was being honest, helping people grow, keeping it real. But then I thought about all the times someone criticized me, even gently, and how my first instinct wasn't to grow, it was to defend, to justify, to retreat. And if I'm being honest, I do the same thing when I'm the one giving it. I tell myself I'm helping, but a lot of the time, I'm just trying to feel superior, to feel right. That's what this chapter exposed in me. It reminded me that people don't change when they feel attacked. They change when they feel understood. And I thought about my relationships, how many moments I've ruined or made harder than they had to be just because I felt the need to correct someone, even when I was right, especially when I was right. It's humbling, because we all want to be good communicators, right? But we forget that connection is more powerful than correction. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do isn't to point out the flaw, it's to leave space for someone to want to grow on their own. Carnegie shares a few stories in the chapter, from Lincoln to prison wardens to everyday conversations, and in each one, the lesson is the same. Criticizing people rarely leads to transformation. It leads to resentment. So what's the alternative? Not silence, not fake praise, but curiosity, compassion, even restraint. Letting someone have dignity, even when they mess up. Because in the long run, making someone feel safe is more powerful than making them feel wrong. That was the gut punch I needed. Because when I look at the people who influence me most, the mentors, the friends, the ones who really helped me change, none of them came at me with critique. They came with belief, with patience, with questions that made me see things for myself. And I think that's what this chapter is trying to teach. You don't have to fight to be heard. You just have to stop making people feel like they're losing when they're with you. So now I'm trying to be slower with my words, quieter with my judgments, more aware of the impact my tone has, even if my intentions are good. Because the goal isn't to win arguments anymore, it's to win trust. And that's a different game entirely. After reading the first chapter, I was already feeling called out. But chapter 2, it didn't call me out, it held up a mirror. And I had to sit with what I saw. Because here's the thing, we all want to feel important. We don't say it out loud, we pretend we're above it, we act like we don't care. But deep down, we all want to feel seen, appreciated, valued, needed. And if you don't believe that, just watch what happens when someone interrupts you mid-sentence, or forgets your name, or brushes off something you're proud of. That little sting you feel? Yeah, that's your importance being dismissed. Carnegie doesn't shame it. He doesn't say get over it. He just says recognize it in yourself and in others, and then learn to speak to it. Because here's the truth he lays down so clearly. There is only one way to get anybody to do anything, and that is by making the other person want to do it. And how do you do that? You give people what they really want. Not just money, not just reward, but the feeling that they matter, that they're significant, that their role, their presence has weight. This chapter isn't about flattery, that's empty. People can smell it. It's about genuine appreciation, and that word genuine is everything. Because most of us are stingy with our praise, not because we don't feel it, but because we think if we give too much, it'll lose its value. Or worse, we think people will get too confident. But here's what I've seen. No one grows faster than someone who feels seen in their effort. You want to build loyalty in a team? Show them where they shine. Want to deepen a relationship? Appreciate the things they think you didn't notice. Want to become more magnetic as a human being? Make other people feel important, sincerely, and often. I tried this recently. Not in a fake, forced way, just in everyday moments. I looked the barista in the eye and told her I loved the way she remembered people's names. I texted a friend and said, "Hey, I noticed how much better you've gotten at setting boundaries. I admire that." I told a client, "You probably don't hear this enough, but your clarity makes collaborating a joy." Small things, 30 seconds, but the effect? Immediate. People lit up, like something inside them stood up a little straighter. And you could feel it, the shift. Because the world is full of noise, of opinions, of criticism, of passiveness. But real warm appreciation, that cuts through, and it leaves a mark. So now I ask myself, where can I give credit? What am I quietly grateful for but haven't voiced yet? And who in my world is doing something worth acknowledging, even if it's small? Because that's the kind of influence I want. Not power over people, but connection with them. And it turns out, making someone feel important doesn't take power. It takes presence. There's a moment that sticks with me. I was having lunch with someone, smart, funny, clearly had a lot going on, but they didn't ask me a single question, not one. We talked for an hour. Correction, they talked for an hour, and the whole time I nodded, smiled, said, "Wow, that's awesome," and waited for my turn to exist. It never came, and when I left the table, I wasn't mad, but I felt invisible. Like I was just a placeholder in someone else's highlight reel. And that's what this chapter reminded me. People don't want to be impressed. They want to be heard. Carnegie says it simply, almost too simply to sound profound. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years trying to get people interested in you. And man, it hits. Because most of us are trying so hard to be interesting, to be liked, to be impressive. We craft stories, we perfect opinions, we rehearse our brand. But how often are we curious? Not just polite, not oh nice, cool, but truly curious about the person in front of us. This chapter flipped a switch for me. It taught me that being liked isn't about how cool I sound. It's about how safe I make people feel to be themselves. And the fastest way to do that? Ask them about what they love, and then shut up and listen. Not with the intent to reply, but with the intent to see them. Their eyes light up, their posture changes, walls come down, and in that moment, that tiny shift, trust is built. It's not magic, it's presence. I started doing this more, in conversations with friends, clients, even strangers at the gym. Instead of trying to be clever, I asked more questions, real ones. What made you choose that path? How did that make you feel? What are you excited about right now? And the conversations, they opened up in ways I didn't expect. People shared more, laughed more, and left feeling lighter. Not because I said anything profound, but because I gave them space to be profound. It made me realize most people are walking around just waiting for someone to ask them something real. And when you become that person, you don't have to sell yourself. You become someone people want to be around, not because you shine the brightest, but because you make them feel like they do. So now, I catch myself. When I'm in a conversation and my mind wants to wander, I come back. Be here, ask, listen, follow up. Not because it's a strategy, but because it's a gift. And when you give it, you might be surprised how often it's given back. You ever hear someone say your name, but in a way that makes you pause, like they actually see you? It's wild how simple it is and how powerful. This chapter reminded me of that a name isn't just a label, it's identity, it's history. It's someone's whole life story, wrapped up into one sound. And when you use it, with warmth, with presence, with sincerity, you're not just talking to someone, you're talking with them, with who they are. Carnegie said it like this: a person's name is, to that person, the sweetest sound in any language. And honestly, he's right. Think about it. We spend so much time trying to impress people, trying to sound smart, trying to say the perfect thing. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is just their name, at the right moment, with care. I remember working with someone a while back, a guy who managed a pretty big team. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, but everyone respected him. Not out of fear, out of connection. One day I asked him what his leadership secret was. He smiled and said, "I remember their names. I use them often." And I thought, that's it. But then I noticed it. He greeted people by name, not just at meetings, stress, but in hallways. He'd say, "Thanks, Maria," or "You crushed it today, Daniel." And the room would shift. People would light up. Because in a world that often makes us feel like background noise, he made people feel like main characters, just by remembering who they were. That stuck with me. Since then, I've tried to do the same. When I meet someone new, I repeat their name. Not in a fake way, just enough to help it land in my brain. I'll write it down after we talk. Say it again at the end of the conversation. Use it when I follow up, and not just to be liked, but because what if remembering someone's name is the first sign that you respect their existence? It's such a small act, but it creates such a big feeling. It says, "You matter, I see you, you're not just another face in my day." That's the energy I want to bring. Not polished, not perfect, just present. Because I think that's what all of this keeps coming back to. Real influence, real connection, starts with the little things we could skip over, but choose not to. And a name, that's not little, that's a doorway. So now I take it seriously. Not just in business, not just in networking, but everywhere. At the coffee shop, at the gym, with the people I love, and the people I'm still learning to love. Because when you say someone's name with care, you're saying more than a word. You're saying, "I haven't forgotten you, and I don't plan to." You ever win an argument, but lose the person? Yeah, me too. It's one of those hard truths you don't really want to admit, because part of you loves being right. It feels good, feels sharp, feels like control. But then after the dust settles, there's this awkward silence, this distance, this feeling like something got broken in the process, and maybe it wasn't worth it. That's what this chapter made me sit with. Carnegie says it so plainly. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. At first, I kind of pushed back against that. Like, what if I'm standing up for truth, for logic, for justice? But then I remembered how many times I've been right and still felt awful afterward. Because what this chapter is really saying isn't never disagree. It's choose peace over pride, choose connection over ego. And it's not about silence either. It's about approach. There's a way to hold your truth without trying to crush someone else with it. A way to express disagreement without turning it into a battle. A way to say, "I hear you and here's where I'm coming from," instead of, "You're wrong, let me fix you." One of the most powerful things I've started doing, especially in tense conversations, is pausing. Not to come up with a clever response, but to genuinely ask myself, do I want to win this point or preserve this relationship? Because I've learned that most arguments aren't actually about the topic. They're about being seen, being respected, being heard. And when you strip that away, no logic in the world can reach someone. But when you offer that, even in disagreement, you leave the door open for real connection. There's this story Carnegie tells about a guy who used to argue constantly until someone gave him a new rule. Try never to argue. Just say, "I may be wrong, I often am. And if I am wrong, I want to be put right." That changed everything for him. And reading that, it softened something in me. Because what if humility isn't weakness? What if it's wisdom? What if being willing to let someone else feel heard, even when you disagree, is what earns their respect more than proving them wrong ever could? Now, when I feel that urge to correct someone, especially in close relationships, I slow down. I get curious. I ask more questions. I say things like, "That's interesting, can you tell me more?" Or, "I see why you'd feel that way." Or even just, "I hadn't thought of it like that." And the wild part, I still get to share my perspective. But now they want to hear it. Because I didn't come in like a wrecking ball. I came in like someone who respects the space between us. And that space, that invisible bridge, that's where influence lives. Not in force, not in facts, in grace. So yeah, maybe next time you feel that heat rising in a conversation, try not to reach for your sword. Reach for a pause, a breath, a bridge. Because winning the argument is easy. Winning the person, that takes heart. So here's something I used to think. That compliments were kind of soft, like a nice thing to say when there was nothing else to say. A polite add-on, a sprinkle on top. But then I read this chapter, and it changed how I see praise completely. Carnegie talks about the power of honest, sincere appreciation. Not flattery, not sugary overkill, but a real, grounded moment of recognition. And when I read that, I thought of a moment I'll never forget. A few years back, I was working on something that no one was really noticing. I wasn't making money from it. I wasn't getting likes or views or much feedback, but I kept showing up. Then, out of nowhere, a message came in from someone I didn't even know that well. All it said was, "Hey, I see how consistent you've been. I know that's not easy. Just wanted to say you're doing something really cool." That one message, it didn't just make my day, it made me keep going. And that's when I realized the right words at the right moment can become fuel. And it costs nothing to give. Carnegie says people hunger for appreciation more than almost anything, and when they don't get it, they shrink, they pull back, they stop trying. But when they do get it, real appreciation, not empty praise, they come alive. You see it in their posture, in their voice, in their effort. And that's what this chapter reminded me, that noticing someone's effort and saying something about it might matter more than we'll ever know. So now I try to pay attention. When someone holds the door, I say, "Thanks, that was thoughtful." When a friend shares something vulnerable, I tell them, "That took guts, I admire that." When someone speaks with clarity or calm or kindness, I reflect it back, not to manipulate, not to get something, just to let them feel seen, in a world that often overlooks everything that doesn't sparkle. There's one line Carnegie drops that I keep coming back to. Flattery is telling the other person precisely what he thinks about himself. Appreciation is telling him what he doesn't hear enough but needs to. That's it. So I've stopped saving compliments for special occasions. I give them when I think them, out loud, in writing, with eye contact. Because I'd rather say it too often than not at all. And you know what? People remember. They remember how you made them feel. They remember the moment you pointed out something good they didn't even realize they were doing. That kind of appreciation, it's not extra, it's essential. And in a world obsessed with recognition at scale, sometimes the most powerful impact you can make is one small, sincere moment with just one person. So here's a confession. I used to think being a good conversationalist meant being clever, telling great stories, having the right take on things, making people laugh, basically, talking well. But this chapter flipped that completely. Because what if being great at conversation has nothing to do with what you say and everything to do with how you listen? Carnegie lays it out, plain and simple. To be interesting, be interested. And that sounds so basic, right? But when I sat with it, I realized how often I'd been doing the opposite. Nodding, sure, but not really listening, waiting for my turn to speak, mentally rehearsing my reply, thinking about how to sound insightful instead of actually hearing the person in front of me. And the worst part, I didn't even realize I was doing it. This chapter made me slow down. It reminded me that most people aren't desperate to be impressed. They're desperate to be understood. And listening, really listening, is how you give them that. I started experimenting with it. The next few conversations I had, I made a rule for myself. Don't bring it back to me. Don't try to add value. Just ask and listen. Let them feel heard. Not with fake nods or fillers, but with presence, eye contact, silence even. And what happened? People opened up more. They relaxed. They stopped rushing through their words like they were trying to prove something. Because finally, someone wasn't trying to steal the mic. Someone was just there. And what surprised me most was this. People left those conversations thinking I was interesting. All I did was let them talk. But in doing that, I gave them a gift they didn't know they needed, space to feel seen. There's something healing about being truly listened to, not because someone wants to fix you. Not because they're collecting ammo to respond, but because for a moment you get to exist fully, without interruption. That's what this chapter gave me. It taught me that listening isn't passive, it's active, it's intentional, and in many cases it's rare, because in a world where everyone's broadcasting, the person who listens deeply, with no agenda, becomes magnetic. So now I practice, not perfectly, not always, but often. And when I catch myself drifting, mentally drafting a response before the sentence is even over, I pause, I come back, be here, ask one more question, let the moment breathe, because sometimes the best thing you can say is nothing at all. You ever been corrected and felt grateful? Yeah, me neither. Because even when I am wrong, the moment someone comes at me with actually, or well, that's not true, something inside me tightens up, and I stop listening. I start defending, even if they're totally right. This chapter helped me understand why. Carnegie puts it so simply, it almost sneaks past you. Show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say you're wrong. That sentence alone, it's changed how I talk, especially in moments where I feel the urge to correct, to challenge, or, let's be honest, to win. Because here's the truth. Even if you're right, the moment you make someone feel wrong, you lose them. Not always permanently, but something shifts. And trust, it's fragile. It doesn't like being humiliated, even politely. We think truth is enough, that if we have the facts, the data, the evidence, we're justified. But influence isn't just about being correct. It's about being kind in how you handle correction. There's this story in the book about a scientist who had the facts, but never started with "you're wrong." He'd say things like, "I may be wrong, and if I am, I want to be corrected." Or "let's look at the evidence together." And what happened? People wanted to listen to him because he didn't make them feel dumb. He made them feel like equals. That's powerful. So I started practicing this in small ways. Instead of saying "that's not true," I'd say "that's interesting. I've heard something a little different. Want to compare notes?" Instead of "that's not how it works," I'd say "I used to think that too until I came across this." Instead of proving, I started inviting, and the energy shifted. People stopped bracing themselves, they opened up. And most importantly, they heard me. Because when people don't feel attacked, they don't feel the need to fight back. They feel safe enough to shift their view, to reflect, to ask questions. That's the space I want to create now. Not a debate stage, a space for growth. And yeah, it takes more humility, more emotional discipline, more patience, but it also builds more trust. And in the long run, that's worth more than any mic drop moment. So now I remind myself, it's not about being right, it's about being effective. And if you want to actually change a mind, start by respecting the heart behind it. There's this weird thing we all do when we feel threatened, even a little bit. We shut down, or we double down. You tell someone they're wrong, they get louder. You back someone into a corner, they defend themselves harder. You try to force someone to change, and suddenly they're more attached to the thing you wanted them to let go of, even when they secretly agree with you. Weird, right? But that's just how people work. We don't like being told, we like discovering it ourselves, and that's what this chapter showed me. Carnegie said it like this: if you want to make someone do something, don't give them orders, let them feel like it was their idea. And honestly, it felt a little manipulative at first, like, really? I have to sugarcoat everything just to get people to listen? But then I thought about all the times I've resisted something. Not because I didn't agree, but because I didn't like how it was delivered. The tone, the pressure, the way it made me feel small. And that's when it clicked. It's not about controlling people. It's about making space for ownership. Because when someone feels like an idea is theirs, they care about it more. They protect it. They act on it. They remember it. That's the magic of suggestion instead of instruction. So I started testing it. Instead of saying you should do this, I'd say, what do you think would happen if you tried it this way? Instead of don't do that, I'd ask, have you thought about what might happen if you kept going down that road? And you know what I noticed? People didn't shut down. They leaned in. They thought. They came to the conclusion on their own, and when they did, they followed through. Not because I was clever, but because I stepped back and let them arrive where they were probably already headed, just on their own terms. It reminded me that real influence doesn't push, it opens doors. Sometimes with a question, sometimes with silence, sometimes with the humility to let someone else have the aha moment, even if you saw it first. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. And in a world where everyone's shouting to be heard, maybe the strongest voice in the room is the one that knows when not to speak. Just ask the question, then let the pause do the work. You ever mess up and immediately go into defense mode? I mean, yeah, but it wasn't really my fault. I just didn't have all the info. That's not what I meant. We've all done it, because for some reason, admitting we're wrong feels like giving up control. Like if we admit it first, the other person wins, and we lose. But what if it's the opposite? That's what this chapter cracked wide open for me. Carnegie says, say about yourself all the derogatory things you know the other person is thinking before they have a chance to say them. And at first I thought, Why would I do that? Won't that just make me look worse? But then I remembered all the moments when someone admitted something before I could call it out, and how it instantly diffused the tension. It didn't make me respect them less. It made me breathe again. It made me want to meet them halfway. Because humility, that's powerful. It lowers defenses. It tells the other person, hey, you don't have to fight me, I already see it. And that little shift, it changes the entire energy of the conversation. I started trying it, small stuff at first. If I missed a deadline, instead of explaining it away, I'd just say, totally my fault. I misjudged the time and didn't communicate that well. You're right to be frustrated. And you know what happened? No one exploded, they softened. Because I wasn't giving them anything to push against. It wasn't about taking the blame to look good. It was about removing resistance so we could actually move forward. That's what this chapter taught me. You don't lose power by owning your flaws. You earn trust, and not the fake kind. The kind that makes people say, okay, I can be honest here too. That's leadership. That's real connection. Because let's be honest, we all mess up, but not all of us are brave enough to name it. So now I try to say it first, not because I enjoy it, but because I know what it creates. Clarity, respect, progress. It's strange, right? We spend so much energy protecting our image, when sometimes the fastest way to earn respect is just to say, yeah, that was on me, and then fix it. You ever walk into a conversation already tense? Like before a single word's even spoken, you know it's going to turn into something uncomfortable? Maybe defensive, maybe combative, maybe pointless. Yeah, same. I used to think those conversations were just unavoidable, like some things are just hard to talk about, right? But this chapter gave me a different lens. Carnegie says, begin in a friendly way. Not cleverly, not with an argument ready, not with evidence stacked and tone sharpened, just friendly. It sounds almost too basic, but the more I sat with it, the more I realized how you enter a moment sets the temperature for the entire exchange. You come in hot, the other person shields up. You come in cold, they mirror it. You come in open, their guard starts to drop. It's not always instant, but it's always influential. And here's the wild part. Being friendly doesn't mean being soft. It means being human. And that, in hard conversations especially, is what changes everything. I remember a moment with a colleague. I was frustrated, genuinely. They dropped the ball on something big. I had every right to call them out. Old me would have led with sharpness, but I paused, and I started with, hey, first off, I know things have been heavy lately, and I'm grateful for everything you're juggling. Can we chat through something that's been on my mind? That shift, it melted everything. They didn't get defensive, they got real, they owned it. We moved forward, not because I let it slide, but because I didn't lead with blame. Carnegie's point in this chapter is clear. You don't lose power by being kind. You gain influence by lowering the temperature. Because no matter how justified you feel, you're never going to reach someone who's bracing for impact. But you can reach someone who feels safe. That's why now, when I feel the tension rising before a conversation, I take a second and ask, how can I open this gently? A soft tone, a little warmth, a reminder that this isn't an attack, it's a connection point. Because I'm not trying to win the moment, I'm trying to protect the relationship. And I think that's what most people want deep down, not to be handled, not to be corrected, just to be approached with enough care to say, you matter more than this disagreement. Start there, and you might be surprised where it leads. You know what feels better than being right? Being heard, being trusted, being the one who came up with the solution, or at least felt like it. And this chapter reminded me just how powerful that feeling is. Carnegie writes, let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers. And yeah, that sounds like something out of a Jedi mind trick playbook. But it's not about being sneaky. It's about letting people feel empowered, not controlled. Because here's what I've noticed in myself and in others. We don't like being told, even when we agree, even when it's good for us, even when it's 100% the right thing to do. Because when someone tells us, some little part of us resists. But when someone guides us, asks the right questions, makes space for us to draw the conclusion ourselves, that changes everything. Because now we're invested, now we own it, and we act on it more confidently. This hit me hard when I thought about all the times I've tried to help people, and it backfired. I'd offer advice, say what I would do, give them the solution wrapped in a bow, but they wouldn't act on it, or they'd brush it off. Not because it wasn't a good idea, but because it didn't feel like theirs, it felt like mine. And people don't always trust other people's ideas, especially when those ideas show up uninvited. So I started trying something different. Instead of saying you should, I'd ask, what do you think might work here? Instead of pitching a solution, I'd lead with curiosity. What have you already tried? Is there something that's been sitting in the back of your mind that you haven't tested yet? What's the angle that would make you excited to move on this? And more often than not, they'd land on the same thing I would have suggested. But now it was their idea. And suddenly, they were excited. They were clear. They were in. Because I didn't tell them what to do. I helped them see it for themselves. And honestly, that's way more satisfying than being right. Because people don't need more advice. They need more space to hear themselves think. And someone safe enough to process that with. So now I ask, do I want credit or do I want change? Because if I really care about outcomes, I have to be willing to let go of ownership. Let the other person feel smart. Let them feel capable. Let them feel like this whole thing was their idea all along. Because that's when things actually move. There's this delicate moment when someone makes a mistake and you see it. Clear as day, you could call it out, point to it, correct it. You might even be right to do it. But here's the question. Will saying it the way you want to say it actually help? That's what this chapter made me sit with. Carnegie says, call attention to people's mistakes indirectly, not to protect their ego, but to protect their willingness to keep trying. Because most of the time when someone screws up, they already know. They're already embarrassed, already replaying it in their head, already bracing for the blow. And when you come in hot, even with the truth, you don't teach. You shrink them. You might get the correction, but you lose the connection. So the art, and it really is an art, is in delivering feedback in a way that helps people stay open instead of shut down. I think of it like this. You can fix a plant that's growing sideways, but if you snap the stem trying to straighten it, you've lost it. So now I try to be softer, still honest, but gentle. Instead of saying, this isn't right, I might say, I wonder if this would work even better like this. Instead of you missed the point, I'll ask, do you think it's possible we're looking at it from two different angles? It's not about being indirect to avoid conflict. It's about being considerate enough to get through. Because the real goal isn't to prove someone wrong. It's to help them grow and keep their confidence intact while they do. One of my mentors used to say, don't criticize the hand that's trying. And that stuck, because anyone who's trying is already doing something brave. They're already out of their comfort zone, already risking failure. The least we can do is help them adjust without making them feel like they should stop. So when I need to give feedback now, I pause and I ask, how would I want to hear this if I were in their shoes? And then I speak from that place, not with shame, not with a lecture, just with care. Because calling someone in, instead of calling them out, is how we keep people moving forward, instead of making them turn around. There's this moment that happens sometimes, when someone says something about you, and it lands so deeply you start seeing yourself differently. Not in a fake, inflated, you're amazing kind of way, but in a true, quiet, maybe I could be that kind of way. That's the magic of this chapter. Carnegie says, give a dog a good name. And no, it's not about literal names. It's about giving people something better to live into, instead of something small to run away from. Because here's the thing, people often live up or down to the identity you hand them. You say you're always late, and guess what? They keep being late. You say you're the kind of person who always shows up, even when it's hard, and suddenly they try harder. We don't always act based on facts. We act based on who we think we are. And if you can gently, sincerely reflect the best of someone back to them, they'll often grow into it without realizing they're doing it. That's what this chapter reminded me. We spend so much time pointing out flaws. Don't do that. You messed this up. You always forget. But what if we flipped it? What if we said, you're someone I count on. You've got great instincts. You strike me as the kind of person who really cares about getting things right. even if they're not fully there yet, even if they've made mistakes, not because we're lying, but because we're calling something forward, giving them a name worth living up to. I tried this with a team member once. They'd missed a few deadlines. I could have labeled them as unreliable, but instead I said, "Hey, I know things have been heavy, and I want you to know, I see how committed you are. You're the kind of person who doesn't drop the ball when it counts. I trust that." And you know what? They didn't miss another deadline after that. Not because I pressured them, but because I gave them a reflection they wanted to earn. That's what this is about. Not manipulation, not sugarcoating, just believing out loud in someone until they start believing it too. Because the version of someone you speak to is often the one you get more of. So speak carefully, speak intentionally, speak into potential, not just past behavior. Because that one sentence you say in passing, it might echo in them longer than you know. You ever try to help someone grow and end up making them feel smaller? Yeah, that one's a hard lesson. Sometimes we give feedback because we care, because we see the potential, because we know they can do better. But here's what we forget. Telling someone they need to improve doesn't always inspire them. It can make them feel like they're failing before they've even begun. That's what this last chapter helped me understand. Carnegie says, make the fault seem easy to correct. Not because it is easy, but because when something feels possible, people start to believe in their ability to change. And when they believe in their ability, they do change. Think about the last time you were called out for something. If someone made it sound like a fundamental flaw, like you always do this or you just don't get it, your motivation probably dropped to zero. But if someone said, honestly, you're really close, a small shift here would make a big difference, suddenly it felt doable, safe, worth a try. That's what this is about. Not sugarcoating the truth, but softening the fear around it. I started using this in my own work, with people I care about, with myself. When someone made a mistake, instead of zooming in on the failure, I'd say, this is a tiny tweak. You've already done the heavy lifting. Or, you've got 90% of this down. Let's just polish that last bit. And the results? Way more energy, way more effort, way more belief. Because now we weren't focused on what was broken, we were focused on what was becoming. And that's the shift. When someone feels like they're being guided instead of judged, they move, they try, they evolve, without needing to be pushed. Because the truth is, people don't change just because they're told to. They change because they want to. Because someone made the path feel just close enough to reach. And you get to be the person who shows them that. So now I ask, when I'm trying to help, am I making the growth feel bigger than them? Or am I making them feel bigger than the growth? That's the line I want to walk. Because I don't want to just influence people. I want to empower them, quietly, gently, and in a way that lasts. That's the end of the book. But maybe just the beginning of something else. Thanks for walking this with me, for listening not just to the words, but to what's behind them. For thinking about how to move through the world with less force and more grace. And for remembering that real influence isn't loud, it's subtle, it's kind, and it starts with how we make people feel. So let's keep doing that, one conversation at a time. And that's it. Not just the end of a book, but maybe the start of something more subtle and more important. Because this wasn't about winning friends or influencing people like they're chess pieces on a board. This was about learning to move through the world more gently, to speak less from ego and more from empathy. To see people not as problems to solve, but as humans who want to be seen, heard, and valued. And maybe most of all, it was about learning how you show up. When you talk, when you listen, when you lead, when you correct, when you care. We live in a world where being loud is rewarded, but connection isn't built in volume. It's built in presence. So if even one conversation feels softer after this, if one relationship feels safer, one moment feels more thoughtful, then this whole thing mattered. Because that's where real influence begins. Not in techniques, in trust. So thank you for being here, for slowing down, for staying curious, for choosing to lead with something deeper than charm. And maybe next time someone says you're a really great person to talk to, you'll smile quietly and remember exactly where it all started. Until next time, keep listening deeply and speaking kindly.